The music hall was already filled long before the event even began. People from different cities had traveled just to see the masterclass of the famous pianist, known around the world. It was the kind of place where most visitors dressed carefully, straightened their backs when they walked, and spoke in soft, respectful voices. Even the air inside the hall had a kind of seriousness to it, as if the walls themselves held years of musical secrets. In the middle rows sat a quiet woman named Elena. She kept her hands folded on her lap and tried not to draw any attention to herself. She wasn't there to impress anyone. She wasn't a student at a conservatory, and she didn't belong to any music academy. She simply came because she wanted to listen, to observe, and maybe learn anything that reminded her of the love she once had for the piano. The renowned pianist, the one people traveled so far to see, finally walked onto the stage. The crowd clapped loudly as he entered with the kind of confidence only someone constantly praised could carry. His steps were slow, smooth, rehearsed. He smiled in a way that showed he knew exactly how important people thought he was. He didn't need to prove a thing. His reputation did that for him. Elena watched quietly. She had seen many musicians before, but there was something different about this man. The way he looked at the audience made it clear he expected admiration. The way he held himself told everyone that he considered himself above them. Even the way he lifted his chin when sitting at the piano suggested that no one else in the hall could match him. After a short introduction, he explained the purpose of the masterclass. He would call volunteers from the audience to play short pieces, then he would correct their technique. The crowd reacted with excitement. Students whispered to each other, hoping they might get selected. Some nervously checked their sheet music. Some practiced moving their fingers silently in the air. Elena simply sat and listened. She had no intention of playing. She had not touched a piano in years. Her connection to music came from a very personal place, something she did not share with strangers. All she wanted was to absorb the atmosphere, maybe feel inspired, maybe reconnect with something she had lost long ago. When the first volunteer walked onto the stage, the pianist leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and observed with a sharp, almost cold stare. The young man trembling before him played a short classical passage. It wasn't perfect, but it was decent, and the audience clapped politely. The master, however, waved his hand dismissively. "No, no, no," he said loudly. "Your hands are stiff. Your timing is lazy. This is not how real musicians play." People laughed not because the mistake was funny, but because the pianist's tone invited them to. Elena felt uncomfortable. She had been around strict teachers before, but there was something different about this. This wasn't guidance. This was humiliation disguised as teaching. The next volunteer played, and the pianist gave the same kind of sharp criticism. His words stung, even for those who only watched. He pointed out flaws as if they were personal failures, as if these students had no right to even touch a piano, unless they met his impossibly high standards. After several more rounds, the pianist stood and looked across the audience. "Next volunteer," he called. Scanning the room, a few hands rose nervously, but none confidently. People clearly feared becoming the next target of his sharp tongue. Elena kept her hands tightly on her lap, her shoulders lowered, hoping not to be noticed. But that was when something unexpected happened. A group of students seated behind her whispered among themselves. One of them nudged another and pointed to Elena. She looked quiet, gentle, almost out of place, an easy target for a joke. One of the students tapped her shoulder lightly. "You should try," the student said with a mischievous smile. "Go on. Show him what you've got." Elena shook her head quickly. No, I'm just here to watch." But before she could say anything else, another student raised his hand sharply and called out, "She wants to try." The pianist's gaze shifted instantly toward her. He raised an eyebrow. "Ah," he said, "a shy volunteer." The audience turned to look at her. Elena's heart pounded. She hadn't asked for this. She didn't want to embarrass herself in front of hundreds of people. But something about the way the pianist looked at her, almost amused, made it impossible for her to refuse without creating a bigger scene. "Come," he said, motioning toward the stage. "Let's see what you can do." People around her started whispering. Some were curious, some playful, some doubtful. Their voices blended into a soft murmur that followed her as she stood up. Her legs felt stiff and shaky. Her palms were sweaty. She avoided making eye contact with anyone as she walked slowly toward the stage. The pianist watched her approach with a smirk. He was already forming an opinion about her, an opinion he didn't bother hiding. When she finally stood beside him, he observed her closely. "You look nervous," he commented loudly. Tell me, what have you studied? Which conservatory did you attend? Elena spoke quietly. I didn't attend one. Her answer drew a few chuckles from the back rows. The pianist widened his eyes dramatically. Oh, he said, tilting his head. So you are self-taught? Or perhaps you simply play for fun? That can be charming. Sometimes his tone suggested he didn't believe she could be charming at all. He motioned toward the bench. Sit, show us something, anything, surprise me. Elena took her place at the piano. Her heart was beating so loudly she could almost hear it over the soft rustle of the audience. Her fingers hovered above the keys but didn't touch them yet. She forced herself to take a deep breath, but it didn't calm her nerves. The pianist leaned over her shoulder slightly, as if examining a child's attempt at art. Relax your hands, he said. They're too stiff. But don't worry, we'll correct that after we see what level we're dealing with. His words made the audience laugh again. Elena swallowed hard. She wasn't a confrontational person. She wasn't used to being on a stage, especially under pressure. She reminded herself that she didn't come here to prove anything to anyone. But now, all eyes were on her, and the expectation wasn't hope, it was mockery. She knew perfectly well what they saw. A quiet woman with no formal training, pressured into performing before one of the greatest pianists of the generation. No one expected her to do well. No one even imagined she might know how to play. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was the quiet world she carried inside her. A world shaped not by classrooms or certificates, but by something far deeper. She learned music not from books or teachers, but from her father, who played not for fame but from the heart. She learned by watching him, listening to him, feeling the way music shaped his life. But that part of her past stayed hidden, locked away behind years of silence after he passed. Now, sitting on that bench, memories she had long avoided began stirring again. Her father's voice, soft and patient, his hands guiding hers, his smile when she played her first melody correctly. All of it washed over her like a wave, but she didn't let those emotions show. She kept her face calm, her eyes lowered. You may begin, the pianist said, tapping his foot impatiently. The hall quieted. For the first time since her walk to the stage, she felt a strange sense of stillness around her, almost as if the world stepped back and gave her a small moment to breathe. Her fingers finally touched the keys she didn't press yet, but she felt the familiar smoothness under her fingertips. The touch reminded her of home, of evenings when her father played softly as she drifted to sleep. It reminded her of the comfort she once felt whenever she sat at a piano. The pianist crossed his arms, waiting. The crowd leaned forward, expecting a clumsy sound, a wrong note, something they could politely laugh at afterward. But Elena wasn't thinking about them anymore. She wasn't thinking about the master pianist beside her. She wasn't even thinking about the stage or the hall or the hundreds of eyes watching her. For one brief moment, she thought only of music, what it meant to her, what it had given her, and what she had lost when she stopped playing. The memories were bittersweet, but they gave her something she needed more than anything at that moment: courage. Her breath steadied. Her shoulders relaxed. And then, slowly, she pressed the first note. The moment Elena pressed that first note, a gentle sound moved through the hall. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't dramatic. It was soft, almost like a whisper. But there was something about it that made a few people stop shifting in their seats. It had a warmth to it, the kind of warmth that didn't come from skill alone but from feeling true. Honest feeling. She didn't rush to play the next note. She paused, letting the sound settle, letting herself settle. The pianist beside her tilted his head, slightly surprised, though he didn't show it too clearly. He still expected an amateur performance, something he could correct within seconds. The audience just seemed unsure of what to expect, and they waited with a mixture of curiosity and doubt. Elena finally continued, letting the next notes fall gently into place. She wasn't playing anything complex. She wasn't trying to impress them with speed or perfect technique. She played the way her father taught her, slow, thoughtful, and with emotion. The simple melody floated across the room, connecting one note to another like threads of a quiet memory. A few people in the hall leaned forward. They didn't know why they were interested yet. They only sensed that something about this woman's playing didn't match the picture the pianist had painted of her. She didn't seem nervous anymore. Her shoulders loosened. Her fingers moved with a soft steadiness, as if they remembered something her mind had forgotten. As she continued, memories from years ago rose inside her like shadows forming shapes. She remembered being a child, sitting on a little wooden stool while her father played. Their home had been small, but when he touched the piano, it always felt bigger. Music filled every corner, every crack, every quiet place. She remembered how he would close his eyes while playing, not to show off, but because he said it helped him see the music better. She never understood what he meant back then, but as she grew older and learned the piano herself, she began to understand that her father didn't play for applause or awards or attention. He played because music was the language of emotion, the place where his heart felt free. He never chased fame. He never believed he needed the world's approval. He played because he loved it. Elena had learned everything from him, not through strict lessons, but through moments, through watching, through quiet hours spent beside him. She learned to listen before she played. She learned to feel before she pressed a key. She learned that music wasn't about perfection. It was about honesty. But those memories weren't easy to think about. After he passed away, music became painful. She avoided the piano for a long time, because every note reminded her of him. She didn't want to feel that sadness again, so she buried the part of herself that once loved music deeply. Now, sitting on this big stage, under bright lights and surrounded by strangers, that part of her slowly awakened again. Her fingers remembered him, even if her heart still trembled. And as the melody continued, the hall seemed to grow quieter, almost as if the audience felt a part of her story without hearing it. But the pianist standing beside her didn't soften. He watched carefully, searching for mistakes, ready to interrupt at any moment. He didn't like being surprised, and something about her calmness made him uneasy. He had expected someone shy, nervous, and easily corrected. Instead, he saw someone who played with a kind of natural emotion he couldn't quite measure. Finally, he cleared his throat loudly. "All right, enough," he said, raising one hand. That was gentle. But gentleness alone isn't music. You need structure, control, training. The audience shifted uncomfortably. They weren't sure if he was right or if they simply didn't hear what he heard. Elena lifted her hands from the keys and rested them quietly in her lap. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply looked at him with calm eyes. He stepped closer, almost crowding her space. "You see," he said to the audience, "this is what happens when someone plays without technical understanding. She has a nice touch, yes, but it's like watching someone walk without knowing where they're going." His tone was sharp, but he wore a polite smile, as if he believed his words were helpful. Elena felt a pinch in her chest, not because his words hurt her deeply, but because they reminded her why she had feared returning to the piano. Judgment, expectation, comparison, all the things her father warned her could kill the joy of music if she let them. She lowered her eyes, not out of shame, but out of thoughtfulness. She wasn't here to compete. She wasn't here to prove anything. But the pianist wasn't finished. He turned to her again. "Tell me," he asked, "how long have you even played? Do you practice seriously? Do you study scores? Or do you simply play whatever you think sounds nice?" There was a small silence before she answered. "I learned at home," she said quietly. "My father taught me." "Ah," the pianist said with a sigh, as if the answer explained everything. "A hobbyist's training." Some people in the hall shifted uncomfortably again. The atmosphere had changed. At first, many found his harshness entertaining, even humorous. But now something felt wrong. It felt personal. It felt unnecessary. Elena kept her voice soft. "He taught me to feel the music first." The pianist laughed lightly. "Feelings come after technique," he said. "Without technique, feelings are just noise." Those words stayed in the air longer than he expected. Some of the audience members looked at each other with uncertain expressions. Many of them came to this masterclass because they admired him. But the way he spoke now seemed less like teaching and more like belittling. Elena looked down at her hands. They trembled slightly, not out of fear, but because memories were rising faster than she expected. She remembered the last day she played with her father. He had been weaker than usual, sitting near the window with soft sunlight falling on his face. She remembered the way he smiled, fragile but warm, and told her, "Even if the world forgets your music, never forget it yourself." It was the last thing he ever said to her. After his passing, she avoided the piano, not because she lost interest, but because she was afraid of feeling that ache again. She tried to convince herself she was too busy, too tired, too old to start again. But deep inside, she knew the truth. She wasn't ready to face the memories, yet here she was, facing them on a stage she never planned to stand on. The pianist stepped closer again. "Let me show you how the passage should sound," he said, pushing the bench slightly as if signaling for her to move aside. She stood slowly and watched him take her place. He cracked his knuckles dramatically for the audience, then played a fast, sharp version of a similar melody. His notes were precise, practiced, and impressive, but they lacked warmth. They sounded like they were trying to prove something rather than express something. The audience applauded politely, but it wasn't the same kind of applause they had given earlier. It felt forced, almost obligatory. He stood up again. "You see," he said, "this is discipline. This is technique. This is music." Elena didn't argue. She didn't even blink. She kept her voice calm and steady. "It's very good," she said softly. Her gentle response only seemed to irritate him more. He crossed his arms. "Now," he announced, "I will give you one more chance. Play something more structured. Show us you can keep up with a real standard." Elena hesitated, not because she feared failing, but because she didn't want to turn music into a competition. She didn't want to play to prove him wrong. She wanted to play for the reason she came in the first place, to reconnect with something she had lost. But looking out at the audience, she noticed something unexpected. Many were watching her not with doubt, but with encouragement. She saw soft smiles, small nods, subtle signs of support. People who had come to admire the famous pianist now seemed quietly rooting for her instead. For the first time in a very long time, she felt a familiar spark inside her. Not confidence exactly, but courage. A small, quiet courage. She sat back on the bench. Her fingers found the keys again. She closed her eyes not to show confidence, but because it helped her see the music better. Just like her father used to say. The hall fell silent, and then she began to play again, not to impress, not to compete, but to speak the one language she knew would never betray her. The language her father left behind. The language she feared she lost. The language of her heart. The moment Elena touched the keys again, something changed in the room. No one could name it right away, but everyone felt it. It was the kind of change that didn't come with loud sounds or dramatic gestures. It came quietly, like a soft wave that slowly pulls the whole shore into silence. Her first notes were delicate, almost hesitant, but they carried a depth that made people sit up straighter without realizing it. The melody she played wasn't famous. It wasn't from a famous composer. It wasn't something people would recognize from competitions or concerts. It was a piece her father used to play in the evenings, when the world outside their window felt calm and still. The audience didn't know that, of course, but they felt something in those notes that made them stop breathing for a moment. Elena kept her eyes closed, not because she wanted to look dramatic or mysterious. She closed them because it allowed her to see her father in her memory, sitting beside her, guiding her hands with gentle patience. She remembered how he used to hum along softly, how his shoulders swayed with each phrase. She remembered the way his voice sounded when he said that music was not simply heard, it was felt. Her fingers moved slowly, shaping the melody like a fragile thread. Every note seemed to carry a story, a memory, a small piece of her heart she didn't know she was brave enough to share. With each passing second, the hall grew quieter, the audience more focused. Even the smallest cough or shuffle stopped. It was as if the room itself paused to listen. The pianist standing beside her felt it too, although he didn't show it. He tried to keep the same stern expression, but something inside him stirred. He had heard thousands of students, thousands of performances, and thousands of attempts at emotion. Most were rough, some were decent, a few were impressive. But this was different. This wasn't the sound of a trained student trying to impress a master. This was the sound of someone who played because her heart needed to speak still. He convinced himself he shouldn't be moved so easily. He folded his arms, shifted his weight, and forced his expression to remain critical. But he could not deny that the hall had fallen into a stillness he rarely saw. Elena's fingers began moving with more confidence as the memories grew clearer, easier to hold. She remembered the little room where she learned to play, how she would sit beside her father while he guided her gently. She remembered the way sunlight used to fall through the window and hit the piano keys, making them look like small pieces of a dream. Her father always said music was a kind of story that didn't use words, a story that spoke directly to the heart of anyone willing to listen. For years, she kept that story inside her, afraid to open it again. But now, as she played, that story poured out of her quietly, naturally, and with so much truth that it felt like the hall itself leaned closer. The melody changed slightly as she reached the middle, shifting from soft to even softer, like a whisper turning into a sigh. Her touch was so gentle that it almost didn't seem possible for the notes to sound so clear. Some of the audience members felt chills. A few others even pressed their hands together, not in applause but in silent awe still. She played as if no one else existed. Her world at that moment was not the stage or the lights or the hundreds of watching eyes. Her world was that small memory of her father sitting beside her, guiding her, smiling with tired but loving eyes. And the deeper she went into that memory, the more the music changed. The pianist began to shift uncomfortably. What he heard didn't match anything he expected. He expected mistakes, hesitation, uneven rhythm. He expected to interrupt her quickly and correct her. But the more she played, the more he realized he couldn't find those flaws so easily. He leaned slightly forward, trying to catch some technical error. But her timing was steady. Her touch was controlled in its own natural way. And even if her technique wasn't shaped by formal training, it had something more powerful emotion that blended seamlessly with sound. Elena herself didn't know she could still play like this. She didn't come here expecting to sit at a piano. She didn't expect to remember the melodies her father taught her with such clarity. She didn't expect to feel this alive, this connected, this open. But every note she played felt like a step closer to something she once lost and feared she could never regain. She played on, letting the melody unfold gently, like petals opening one by one. The hall remained still. No one shifted. No one whispered. No one even breathed too loudly. People who came expecting a technical lesson now found themselves pulled into an emotional moment they hadn't prepared for. A woman in the front row felt her eyes sting with tears. She didn't know Elena. She didn't know Elena's story. But she felt something raw in the music, something that reminded her of her own past. A man beside her folded his hands together tightly, as if trying to hold on to a feeling he hadn't felt in years. Elena reached a soft passage toward the end of the piece, a part her father used to repeat often. It was a gentle climb that led into a quiet little pause, followed by a single note that always felt like a question, the kind that stays in the air for a moment before finding its answer. Her fingers moved with such tenderness that the note sounded almost like a breath. The silence that followed was so deep that even the smallest sound would have felt out of place. And then she played the final notes. They were simple. They were unpolished in a way that felt natural, human, and sincere. But they carried something that no amount of training could manufacture: truth. When the last note faded, the hall remained completely silent. No one clapped yet. No one wanted to disturb what they had just witnessed. It was as if the audience needed a moment to return to themselves. Elena lifted her hands slowly from the keys. Her heart was beating fast, not from fear, but from the weight of emotion inside her. She opened her eyes, expecting to see judgment, disappointment, maybe even confusion. What she saw instead was stillness, dozens of faces, frozen in quiet amazement. Some looked emotional, some looked stunned, some looked confused because they didn't understand how someone who looked so shy could play with such depth. The pianist beside her stood stiffly, his eyes fixed on her hands. He didn't speak right away. He didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't offer advice. For the first time since the masterclass began, he didn't seem to know what to say. He finally cleared his throat, but the sound came out softer than usual. That was interesting, he said, but even he heard the weakness in his own voice. He tried to regain his confident posture, but something inside him felt shaken. He never expected to be challenged in a way he couldn't control. And Elena, without trying to prove anything, had done just that. The audience remained silent, waiting for his next words, waiting to see how he would respond to something so undeniably heartfelt. But Elena didn't focus on him. Instead, she looked down at her hands. She felt a warmth inside her chest, a warmth she hadn't felt in years. It felt like her father was there with her. Somewhere in that music, somewhere in that quiet moment, she realized something important, something she had forgotten for too long. Music was not about approval. It wasn't about training. It wasn't about fame or skill or perfection. It was about connection. And for the first time in many years, she felt connected again to her past, to her father, to herself. The audience was still silent, waiting. And then something unexpected happened. Someone in the back row began to clap. Just one person, but the sound was clear and strong. Then another person joined, then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire hall erupted into applause. Not polite applause, not forced applause, but a heartfelt applause filled with respect and genuine emotion. Elena's eyes widened. She didn't expect this. She didn't believe it was for her, but it was. And as the applause grew louder, filling every corner of the hall, the pianist beside her stood frozen, unable to hide the shock in his eyes. Elena remained seated, her hands trembling just slightly, overwhelmed not by fear, but by the realization that something inside her had awakened again, something she thought was gone forever. The moment the room fell silent, She felt her heartbeat echo louder than the piano itself. The notes she had just played were still floating in the air, like they refused to disappear. For a second, she didn't know what to do. She kept her hands resting on the keys, afraid to move, afraid to interrupt whatever spell her music had cast over everyone. She slowly lifted her head. People were staring at her, not with judgment or irritation, but something else. She didn't know what it was. Maybe amazement, maybe disbelief, maybe both. The billionaire who had insisted she play stood frozen, as if he couldn't understand what he had just witnessed. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled them away from the keys. She felt shy, almost embarrassed, the way a person feels when they accidentally reveal something personal. She stood up quietly, wanting to slip away before anyone said anything to her. She wasn't used to attention. She wasn't used to being seen. But before she could step away from the piano, someone started clapping. It was just one person at first, an older woman sitting near the front. She clapped slowly, almost cautiously. Then another person joined, then a third, and within seconds, the entire room was filled with applause so loud that she felt it vibrate in her chest. She had never expected anything like this. She didn't know where to look. She kept her eyes low, her cheeks warm, her hands slightly shaking. It all felt too big for her, too overwhelming. She had only wanted to play a single song. She hadn't planned on anything more. The billionaire stepped closer to her, still stunned. He took a slow breath, as if he needed it to understand the moment properly. "How long have you been hiding this?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "I'm not hiding anything, I just don't really play for people." "That wasn't just playing," he said. He paused, searching for the right word. That was something extraordinary. She didn't know what to say. Compliments were not something she received often. She spent most of her days serving tables, cleaning up spills, carrying trays that felt heavier after every shift. Nobody asked about her talents. Nobody asked what she loved. Nobody asked what she dreamed of. People assumed she had no time for dreams. Another woman approached her, her eyes bright with excitement. "Please," the woman said, "can you play another one?" She felt her chest tighten. I don't know. It's okay if you don't want to," the woman quickly added. "But your music, it felt like something we don't hear often. Not like this. Not with this kind of emotion." Emotion. That word made her pause. Of course her playing had emotion. Her entire life was inside those notes. The quiet struggles, the long nights, the small dreams she kept tucked away because she didn't know if they mattered. Every time she played, she wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was trying to breathe. She looked at the piano again. She felt drawn to it, the same way a child feels drawn to something that once comforted them. The same way she had felt when she practiced alone in the empty restaurant after closing. The applause slowly faded as the room waited for her decision. The expectation in the air was gentle, not demanding. No one was pressuring her. They were simply hoping. She took a breath. "I can play one more," she said quietly. A smile spread across the room. She sat down again, this time with a little more confidence, not because she believed she was great, but because the room wasn't hostile. For once, she wasn't being judged. She was being heard. She pressed the first key, letting the soft sound settle. Then another. Then she let her hands flow. This time the music was lighter, calmer, like a soft breeze after a heavy storm. It felt peaceful, free. She didn't rush. She didn't overthink. She just played the way she always wished she could without hiding. When she finished, there was no stunned silence this time. Instead, the applause came instantly, warmer and louder than before. Someone near the back even shouted, "Bravo," which made her laugh quietly in surprise. But the sound that caught her off guard the most was the soft sniffle from someone wiping away tears. She had made someone cry. She had no idea her music could do that. The billionaire stepped forward again. "You have a gift," he said, "and the world should hear it." She shook her head immediately. No, I'm not looking for anything like that. I just play for myself." "But why only for yourself?" he asked gently. "Why hide something that brings so much beauty into the world?" She didn't have an answer, not one she could speak out loud. The truth was simple. She never believed she was good enough, not talented enough, not special enough. She thought her dream was too big for someone like her. Before she could respond, the manager of the restaurant hurried toward them, his face filled with an expression she had never seen on him before, almost proud. "I had no idea you could play like that," he said. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" She shrugged softly. "It never seemed important." "Important?" he repeated, almost laughing at the idea. People come to this place for luxury, for atmosphere and what you just played. That's something money can't buy." She felt shy again and stepped back a little. The billionaire spoke to her with a kinder tone this time. "Listen," he said, "if you ever want help, if you ever want to pursue this seriously, I know people who can guide you. I'm not saying you must. I'm not expecting anything, but if you ever feel ready, just know the opportunity is there." His voice wasn't forceful. It was gentle, respectful. It wasn't the tone of a man showing off his power, but someone who had been genuinely moved. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She just nodded, unsure of what tomorrow might bring. The billionaire stepped aside, letting others come forward. A young couple told her that her music reminded them of their first date. An older man said it brought back memories of his late wife. A teenager whispered that they wanted to learn piano after hearing her play. People weren't complimenting her skill. They were sharing what her music made them feel. That was the part that touched her most. When the crowd finally began to settle, she stepped away from the piano slowly, feeling lighter than she had all night. It was as if she had opened a door she didn't know existed inside her. She returned to the staff area, hoping to catch her breath. Her co-workers stared at her with wide smiles. "Why didn't you tell us you could do that?" one of them asked. She laughed softly. "I didn't think it mattered." "Well," the co-worker said, "it mattered tonight." Everyone nodded. She changed back into her apron, still trying to process everything that had happened. She felt different somehow, though she couldn't put the feeling into words. It wasn't confidence exactly. It wasn't joy either. It was something quieter, like hope. When she stepped back outside, the billionaire was waiting near the door. He didn't interfere. He didn't pressure. He simply said, "Thank you for the music," and then left. She walked home that night with the memory of the piano keys still alive in her fingertips. She had always believed her life was ordinary, simple, forgettable, but for the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was something inside her worth sharing with the world, and that thought alone was enough to change everything. She stood beside the piano, her hands still slightly warm from the last notes she had played. The hall was quiet again, not because people were unsure of how to react, but because they were still trying to process what they had just witnessed. It felt as if the music was still floating in the air, refusing to fade away completely. Even the lights above seemed softer, as if they, too, were touched by what she had done. The audience slowly began to settle back into their seats after the long applause. A few people wiped their eyes, while others leaned toward their friends, whispering things like they had seen something unreal. She kept her eyes on the floor, still a little overwhelmed. She had never expected any of this. She had only wanted to prove something to herself, maybe to honor her father in her own quiet way. But now she had moved an entire room without even planning to. The renowned pianist walked toward her. A short while ago, he had been the most confident person on that stage. Now, he looked unsure, almost careful. His pride had cracked a little, not because she defeated him, but because her playing had reminded him why music mattered in the first place. He stood beside her, waiting until the hall settled down. When he finally spoke, his voice didn't carry the arrogance it did before. It was calm, almost gentle, like someone who had learned a lesson they didn't expect to learn today. He didn't give a long speech. He didn't try to hide what he had said earlier. Instead, he simply looked at her and admitted that he had judged her too quickly. He told her that her music held something rare, not just skill, but a heart, something not many musicians, even the most famous ones, could show so openly. She felt her chest tighten, not from pride, but from relief. She didn't need praise from him, but hearing someone like him recognize her talent made her feel as if the years she spent avoiding the piano had not erased what she once had. She nodded politely, not sure what to say. Words never seemed enough when something came from deep inside. He stepped back and addressed the audience, telling them that moments like this were why he dedicated his life to music. People listened with quiet respect. Some of them had raised their phones to capture the moment earlier, but now most lowered them, almost embarrassed to interrupt the energy in the room. When the masterclass ended, people rushed forward to talk to her. Some wanted to shake her hand. Others wanted to tell her how the music made them feel. One older woman said it reminded her of a memory she had buried years ago. A young student told her that her performance gave them hope, that talent doesn't always hide behind confidence. She listened to everyone, smiling softly, though inside she was still trying to understand how everything shifted so quickly. She eventually stepped outside the hall. The cold air brushed against her face, calming her racing thoughts. For the first time in years, She didn't feel the heaviness that usually followed her. She felt light, almost free. She walked slowly toward the small bench outside, the same kind of bench her father used to rest on after their long days of street performances. She sat there, closing her eyes for a moment. Her father's voice felt close again, not in a sad way this time. She imagined him smiling, telling her that she finally allowed herself to be who she was meant to be, not someone hiding behind fear or doubt, not someone convinced their gift didn't matter, but someone who carried music inside her, the kind that touched people without trying to impress them. As she sat there thinking, the renowned pianist stepped outside as well. He approached with slow steps, as though unsure whether she wanted company. When she looked up, he asked if he could join her. She nodded. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply sat side by side, listening to the distant hum of traffic and the light breeze. After a while, he asked how long she had been playing. She told him about her father, how he taught her everything she knew without ever having formal training. The pianist listened quietly, clearly moved. He told her that talent like hers was something that couldn't be taught, that while he had spent his life mastering technique, she carried a natural understanding of emotion that many musicians spent their entire lives searching for. She felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. It wasn't something she knew how to accept easily. Then he made an unexpected offer. He invited her to join one of his upcoming small performances, not as a student, not as someone learning, but as a guest. She blinked in surprise, unsure whether she heard correctly. He reassured her that he meant every word. He believed her playing deserved to be heard by people who truly understood music. She hesitated, not out of fear, but because she needed to be sure she was ready. She spent years avoiding any stage, avoiding any room where a piano sat waiting for her. But today had shown her that she didn't need to run anymore. Something inside her had awakened, something she thought was lost. After a long breath, she agreed. His smile widened, and he thanked her, not out of politeness, but because he truly meant it. He got up and walked back inside to finish speaking with a few organizers. She stayed outside a little longer, letting her decision settle in her heart. When she finally went home that evening, she opened the door quietly, still unsure how to explain the day in simple words. She placed her small bag on the table and walked to the old upright piano in the corner, the one she kept covered for years. She ran her fingers over the dusty cloth, then slowly lifted it. The keys looked the same as always, but now they carried a different meaning. This piano wasn't a reminder of loss anymore. It was a reminder of what she still had. She sat down, not to practice, not to impress, but simply to feel the keys again. When she played the first note, it echoed softly through her home. She played another, then another. Soon the room filled with a gentle, warm melody that made her close her eyes. This time she didn't play to please anyone. She didn't play to prove anything. She played because music was a part of her, a part she no longer needed to hide. In the days that followed, word spread from the masterclass. People began asking about her, wondering who she was. They spoke about the quiet woman who stunned an entire hall with a single performance. Her name, once unknown, started drifting through small music circles, not in a loud, flashy way, but in a way that made people curious. She accepted the pianist's invitation. When the day of the performance arrived, she walked into the smaller, more intimate hall with a calm heart. There were no mocking smiles this time, no judgment, only respect. When she sat at the piano again, she felt none of the fear she once carried. The first note she played that night was steady, confident, and as the music began to flow, she felt as though she had stepped into the life she was meant to live. The audience listened with the same stillness she saw days earlier. Every note she played seemed to reach someone in the room. It wasn't about perfection, it was about truth, and she had plenty of that inside her. When the performance ended, the hall filled with applause once again. But this time she didn't look surprised. She simply smiled, grateful for the chance, grateful for the journey that brought her there. Her life didn't become instantly famous or glamorous. She didn't seek that. She didn't want it. But she did receive invitations to perform in small events, gatherings, and circles where people appreciated music for its soul. She also began teaching a few young learners who felt nervous, shy, or judged. She understood them better than anyone. She built a quiet, meaningful life around the thing she loved the most, and every time she played, she carried her father's lessons with her, letting them guide her fingers. Her journey wasn't about triumph over someone else. It was about rediscovering herself. In the end, her music didn't just silence a hall. It awakened a part of her she thought she had lost forever.